Well, I am so glad that you are with us as a part of this Easter season and this Easter holiday. I want to welcome you. My name is Keith, and wherever you're at across our church, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of Easter with us and sharing a part of your holiday alongside the Grace Fellowship family. One of the things that I love about Easter is that it's something that we're celebrating literally with billions of people around the planet. And what we're celebrating isn't an idea, it's not an emotion, it's not simply a religious thought or a concept, but what we're celebrating is a real human event. An event that we believe split human history right down the middle and divided reality in a way that we all have to come to grips with and wrestle with. And so that's what we're gonna do, is spend a little bit of time thinking about what we believe God has done and how that can impact your life. Now, before I do that, this is my 19th Easter that I've preached, and I know how this goes. There are some of you that you're here because mom or dad or grandma or grandpa said so, and it's what you're supposed to do. Others of you are here out of tradition, but the truth is, for many of us on Easter, we haven't been around church for a while. And what I want to do is I want to invite you to come back on a weekend that's not Easter. In fact, I want to invite you to come to a series that we're starting at Grace next weekend called Future Me. And as we get into this series, the reality is all of us are going to end up somewhere. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you're going to be somebody. The question is, are you the somebody that you ended up being on purpose or on accident? Did you choose to become the person that you ultimately became? And so what we want to spend a few weekends doing here at Grace is thinking about the future version of us and saying, what do we want that future version to be marked by, and how do we get after that? Now, whatever you believe about Jesus, whatever you believe about faith, we believe that there's something in this conversation for you. And so we want to invite you back. And even if you don't come to the same conclusions about God that many of us here at Grace have come to, we do believe that this series is going to be helpful and hopeful for you. So I invite you to come back and be a part of that next weekend at Grace, whatever campus that you're at. When I was in 6th grade, I wrestled. Now, that should surprise many of you because number one, I don't look like or come across as a wrestler because I'm not. And number two, most of you know that my first love athletically is basketball. And if you put 2 and 2 together, basketball season and wrestling season are the same time of the year. And so even if I was interested in wrestling growing up, I really never would have done it because I was always playing basketball. But this particular year, 6th grade, was the year before our school basketball season started in 7th grade. And so I was just playing kind of local basketball as a part of our town. And my friend convinced me to wrestle. So I decided to wrestle that year while I was playing basketball. And the truth is, guys, I came out of the gate and I was crushing it. All right? I was winning. And I started off 1-0, and then I went to 2-0, and then I went to 3-0. And the reason I was winning at wrestling is because I'm extremely claustrophobic. And so when people got on top of me, I turned into like a Marvel comic book superhero, and I got extra strength, and I just pressed people off of me because I just couldn't handle it. And so I freaked out, and I became like a madman when people were on me, and they'd get on me, and I'd just go nuts, and I'd turn into the Hulk, and then I'd win. And so I go to 4-0 to 5-0. The next thing I know, I'm 8-0, and I'm kind of like, I'm the stuff. I'm the bomb. I'm good. Like, nobody can beat me. Well, this one dude on our wrestling team, his name was Tommy. He started to see that I was getting kind of a little bit of large head about my wrestling skills. And he said, dude, I'd like to wrestle you. Now Tommy was the dude on our wrestling team. Like, he was the guy. Nobody beat him. He went on in high school in the state of Ohio to finish in the top 6 his junior year and his senior year. So he was like really, really good. And he's like, I want to have a wrestle off with you at practice. And because I was kind of feeling myself, I was like, let's do it. So here's how it started out. You know, we're there and we get ready to go and the whistle blows, our coach starts us off, and like immediately he takes me down. He takes me down, he gets me on my back, he gets 3 back points, and he could have pinned me, but he didn't pin me, he lets me up. Then he takes me down again, and he gets me on my back and he gets 3 back points, and just when he's about to pin me, he lets me up. He proceeds to do this repeatedly for the entire first period. And I think at the end of the first period, it was like 18-4. And the only reason I had 4 points was I got escape points because he let me go. But he's just destroying me, right? So then the way wrestling works is you flip like this little thing and you have to decide, do you want to be on your knees and the person's on top of you, or you want to be on top of the person and then they're on their knees. And I said, I'll go down, right? And so the whistle blows, and instead of trying to like shoot out and get up, I literally just roll over on my back to say, pin me. He stands up, he's like, bro, what are you doing, dude? I'm like, dude, I'm not doing this anymore. You're way better than me. I'm sick of being embarrassed. Just finished. The coach is like laughing out loud at me at this point, right? He blows the whistle, we shake hands, and life goes on. Now, here's the thing. In that particular moment, I had something happen to me that happens in athletics all the time. It happens in individual athletics, it happens in team athletics, which is you run into someone who's just better than you. You run into someone that you're outmatched by. They can beat you, they can overcome you in all the ways that you're not able to deal with. And what's true in athletics, but it's also true in life, is this, guys. We all come to a point where we meet our match. We come to a point where we meet our match. We come to a point where we look and we go, they're just better. That team's just better. They have more talent. They can execute at a higher level. They're faster, they're stronger, they're bigger, whatever it is. They just better than us. And you meet your match. But here's what's true. That happens athletically, but it happens in business. It happens in hobbies. It happens in different ways where you just run into someone, you're like, I've met my match, they're better than me. But this happens beyond human beings. Let's take the idea of meeting our match, and it shows up in the human experience. The truth is you arrive at situations where you can't overcome them. It might be in your marriage. It might be with your parenting. It might be a problem at work. But it might be an addiction. It might be anxiety and depression, where you just find yourself going, I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. Like every move I try to make, there's a counter and I'm losing and I can't win and I'm overcome. I'm overmatched. I don't know what to do next. And if you've ever been at that place, and if you live long enough, you'll be at that place. And when you are, that's all you can see in life. You can't see past the struggle with your kids. You can't see past the work difficulty. Everything is filtered through your depression and your struggle. And it's like the days are darker and longer and more difficult. And you're like, man, I would give anything to get out of this. I wish I could just find a way to move past this. It's like hopeless and discouraging. And so when you're in that struggle, here's what you want when you've met your match. When you're at that place, you'd give anything for an overcomer when you're overcome. You'd give anything for an overcomer when you're overcome. What you want more than anything is a solution. You want a way out. I mean, when you think about the definition of overcome, it's succeeding in dealing with a problem or difficulty. It's defeating an opponent. It's prevailing. And you want to prevail and you want to defeat that opponent and you want to move on and you want to get out of the struggle. Man, that if you could find an overcomer, you don't care if it's a podcast you got to listen to, a book you got to read, therapy you got to go be a part of. You don't care if it's a rehab assignment, if it's a counselor, if it's a friend, if it's a mentor, if it's a new job, whatever it is. What you know is that you're stuck and you're overcome, and what you want is an overcomer. And if you've ever gotten to a place where you've been there and then you get out of that, man, that hope turns into joy and it's good. But here's what you know. The way the human experience is, the moment you get out from being overcome by one thing, something else shows up and overcomes you. It's like you solve the problem at work with your boss, and then your kids go crazy. Then you solve the problem with your kids, and your health goes nuts. And then you solve the problem with your health, and then you don't have enough finances to make it go. It's like everywhere you turn, it's like, man, I overcame that, or I thought I could overcome that. I feel trapped by that. And then the next thing you know, it keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going. And here's what you know. You wouldn't call it this, but there is a condition that is pervasive in all of human history. It's a condition that's affected people 200 years before us, and it'll affect people 200 years after us. And it's this condition called sin. And sin has affected everything. It's affected the way we behave. It's affected the way we engage. It's affected the way the weather works. It's affected the way we deal with emotions and pain and struggle. It's changed. It's broken everything. And ultimately, it's separated us in our relationship against God. And that issue, that thing called sin, is underneath all of the human experience. And what it does is it creates us in this constant thing of going, are we going to solve it? Are we going to solve it? Are we going to solve it? Is there going to be any peace? Now, some of you are like, Keith, I was kind of with you until you started using the word sin. Because that's like not a word we like in our culture. You'll be down with like people make mistakes. You'll be down with people make bad choices and there's bad ideas and all that. But when I say sin, the idea that they're right is right and wrong and you can offend God and really sin against others, like people pump the brakes on that. But come on, if there is a God and he's good and he's perfect, you would want the idea that there's right and wrong. You'd want him to be able to say that's in bounds and out of bounds. And you'd want him to call it something. But for a second, here's what you need to know. Number one, you do sin. You don't want to say that, but you sin. In fact, we'll just take like the basic thing that most people are familiar with, which is like the 10 commandments, right? Like God's 10 basic rules for how we're supposed to interact with each other. And I don't have the time, but if I was to go through them one by one, what you would find out is that you violate all of them. You're like, no, I don't. No, you do. Like, I'll just pick one of them, okay? One of them says, don't lie, and you lie. How do I know you lie? Because the last time you updated your iPhone, it came and it said, did you read the terms and conditions? If so, check this box. And none of you do. You want to know how else I know you lie? Because when you go to update your license and the person on the other side of the counter asks you how much you weigh, you tell them the same. And the delta between what you really weigh and what's on that ID is pretty significant. And I could keep going, but listen to me. At your core, on a heart level and desire level, I'm just being honest with you, you are an idolater, an adulterer, a murderer, and a liar. You're like, dude, that is unfair. You don't even know me. Okay, here's what I know about you. You don't even meet your own standards for what you think right and wrong are. Even the things that you would say this is what you should do with your life, you don't do. Like, it's barely a quarter of the way through the year and you didn't even maintain your New Year's resolutions. Because we don't even hold to our own standards. And so what happens is sin has pervaded our entire existence and it creates this struggle where we're overcome and there's difficulty and there's doubt and there's failure and there's mistakes and there's pain and there's disease and there's crying and it's difficult. And then we all wake up and we say, is there hope? Is there an answer? Can we get out of this? Are we just doomed? Are we just stuck? And as we consider that, I'm reminded what Jesus said to his key guys. See, Jesus, as he showed up on earth, he's near the end of his time before he's crucified, and he's talking to his guys, his leaders, and they're having dinner together. And he's telling them, guys, this is what's gonna happen. This is what's gonna happen. This is what's gonna happen. And he's telling them he's gotta die and he's gonna resurrect and all this is gonna go on. And he's telling them ultimately that he's gonna overcome sin. And here's what he says about why that's so important. He says, I've told you these things, this stuff about like what I'm gonna do with death and resurrection, all that stuff. I've told you these things. I've communicated all this to you. And here's why, ready? I've told you all these things so that in me, you may have peace. He's like, I know the human experience. You're overcome, you're overwhelmed, you're overmatched, you're struggling, you don't think you can go on. But don't worry, guys, I'm telling you this stuff so that in me you can have peace. What I'm telling you this Easter is that in Jesus you can have peace. You can like literally know peace and be okay even when it's not okay. That you can keep moving even when you don't want to move. And so he says, I've told you these things so that in me you might have peace. In this world you will have trouble. It's not if, it's how much. Jesus says it like, on this side of glory, it's going to be difficult. You're gonna have pain, you're gonna have angst, you're gonna have turmoil, you're gonna be overmatched. In this world, while you're here, in your family, at your job, in your neighborhood, in our society, you will have trouble. And then he says, but it's all right, ready? But take heart, I've overcome the world. I know it's hard. I know you're overmatched. I know you're stuck. I know you don't know what to do. I know you find yourself going, I'm not sure I can move anymore. And he goes, listen, take heart. I've overcome the world. I've won. I've given victory. I have made it so there is a way. And then what we need to do is kind of backtrack and remind ourselves, how did he overcome the world? How does that look? How does that play out? If you have a Bible that you want to turn on or turn to, I'd welcome you to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. You don't need it. It'll be up here on the screen. The guy who's writing these words is a guy named Paul who hated God. He's transformed and he meets God and he has a relationship with the person of Jesus. And he's writing to a church in Corinth and he's writing to them about what God said when he said, hey, I've told you these things. In other words, the work of the good news of the Christian faith, what Jesus has done for us. And he's gonna tell us those, and at the core of it, he's gonna remind us of what's central for what Jesus has done in overcoming this issue of sin. And he says, now brothers and sisters, referring to the people in the church, I wanna remind you of the gospel. Gospel just means good news. I wanna remind you of what God has done for you. The gospel that I preached to you, which you received and which you have taken your stand. He's like, I showed up and I told you the truth and I have met you with coffee and I told you the truth and we talked about it in big groups and I told you the truth. And many of you stood on that and said, we're in. We believe that good news about what God has done. And then he continues, by this gospel, the one that I told you, you're saved. That's what changes you. That's what allows you to be an overcomer with the one who's overcome. If you hold firmly to the word I've preached to you, otherwise you have believed in vain. He says, but some of you are starting to believe a different gospel, which isn't the gospel at all. And at the core was that some of them were saying, does it really matter whether or not Jesus resurrected? And he spends this whole chapter going, no, it's a really big deal that Jesus resurrected. And if you start to believe it, you're gonna believe something that's not true. Okay, look at me, please look at me. You can be familiar with the Christian story and know a bunch of things about Jesus and church and Christmas and Easter. And yet if you start getting rid of the most important parts of it, suddenly it's no longer the Christian story. And he says, you guys are gonna start believing something that is not the Christian story anymore. So he goes back and he reminds them of the Christian story. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance. I made sure you knew this and you heard this, all right? And here's what it is. This is how Jesus has overcome the world to give us peace. That Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures. This is really important. The part of the gospel, the good news story, and the way that we are able to have victory, and that Easter reminds us, is that Jesus Christ went to a cross in our place and died on it, that he was really killed, and that he really sacrificed himself for you and for me. And he says that Christ died and that he was buried and that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. So he was killed, he was put in a tomb, he was left there, they ran a spear through his side, declared he was dead, and then 3 days later he rose. And he started to appear to people. He first appears to some women, then he appears to Cephas, we know him as Peter, and then to the 12. So he starts to appear to the disciples. And then he continues and he says this, after that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time. Now, this is really important. And you heard Ryan in his testimony talk about the evidence that the crucifixion and resurrection really, really happened and why we should believe it. This is one of those. Because Jesus, when he appears, he shows up into a room and he appears to 500 people at the same time. Now, some people say that's not true. They all did like some drugs and hallucinated at the same time. Now, never, ever, ever has there been a mass hallucination where everyone saw the exact same thing. If there's a group hallucination, they all see different things. So the idea that they all did like the same drug and then went, oh, Jesus, there he is, he's hanging out with us, is crazy. It doesn't add up. And then Paul's like, and in case you just like don't want to take my word, he's like, most of whom are still living. If you don't think he's really alive, here's what you need to do. Go down the street, take a left, ask for Joe. He was there. He's like, a few of them are dead, a few of them have fallen asleep, but most of them are still around. And then he continues. Then Jesus appeared to James. Now that's really important that Paul calls that out because James is Jesus' half brother. Obviously, Jesus' mom is Mary, James' mom is Mary, but James' dad is Joseph. Jesus' dad is ultimately God the Father. But his half brother, James, said he saw Jesus. Now, I say this every single Easter. What would it take if you have a brother for your brother to believe that you're God? Some of you are like, my brother thinks he's God. It would take a lot, right? And no matter how close your relationship with your brother is, I bet he's never sang worship songs to you or you've never sang worship songs to him. But James, fully convinced that his brother is God after the resurrection, actually is killed and brutalized in a terrible way when he himself dies. And then he says this, he appeared to James, then to the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also as one abnormally born. And so here's here's what Paul's making the point of. He's like, listen, something happened in human history, and what it was is that Jesus died and then he rose again, and this changed everything, because in that moment, Jesus was dealing with the thing that we are all overmatched by. I don't know what your upbringing was like. I don't know what messages you heard at home or what messages you heard at school or in our culture. But one of the messages sometimes that they tell you at home and that they tell you in the culture is that you can be anything you want if you try hard enough. I love you, that's not true. Some of you will never have any chance to play in the NBA, and you never had a chance. Some of you were never gonna be a professional musician. I don't care how much work you did, it's not true. But I'm also gonna tell you something else. No matter how hard you try, no matter how religious you are, no matter how charitable you are, no matter how educated you are, no matter what you believe intellectually, you are never gonna solve the problem of sin. But I have great news for you. Easter reminds us of this reality. The Easter message is you can't, but Jesus did. You can't overcome the problem of sin, but Jesus did. You can't solve it, but Jesus did. You were never going to be able to make a way to allow this to really happen, but Jesus has. And the gospel message shows up and it says, in a world where you're overmatched and there is problem after problem, and at the root of it, at the center of it is this condition called sin, that there is a solution, and the solution is ultimately the person of Christ. And that when you believe that and his power and presence shows up in your life, it doesn't make everything go away, it doesn't make everything perfect, it doesn't mean you don't have trials, but what it does mean is that you believe that the power of God is with you in every circumstance you face. And whether it's good or bad, you can get to tomorrow. What you believe is that God is working all things for the good of those who believe. And you believe there's a day coming where there will be no more pain, no more sorrow, no more suffering, because Jesus died and he rose again. And you couldn't have done that, and neither could I. But Jesus has. And the point of Easter is that you needed an overcomer, and so did I. And that overcomer is the person of Christ. When you start to unpack what Paul is telling us in this story, there's a few points that I want to make about this overcoming work of Jesus. A few words that I want you to process as you think about this story this Easter season. The first word that I want you to think about what Jesus has done that you couldn't do is the word predicted. It's the word predicted. The gospel writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, record aspects of Jesus resurrecting. And multiple times as it records that he resurrected, Jesus does something once he's resurrected, and the people go, oh, we remembered his words. We remembered his words. See, what had happened was Jesus, multiple times while he was on earth, he predicted that this was going to happen. He called his shot. He said, this is what is going to go on. And the truth is, the gospel writers are surprised that the people are surprised, because the people should have been outside of the tomb going 5, 4, 3, 2, but they weren't. And they weren't because they didn't listen. Instead, he comes back and they're like, oh my gosh, he came back. We can't believe that. And they shouldn't have been, because what you need to know, and this is what's beautiful about Easter, is that before the foundation of the earth, before you were ever conceived, before your parents were ever born, before they ever met, before any of it, God saw you and he made a plan to come and chase you. It's incredible. God loved you and sought you before you ever cared. He died for us while we were yet sinners. God organized all of human history to make it so that he could rescue you. In fact, the majority of the first half of the Bible is God telling you, I'm coming to get you, I'm coming to get you, I'm coming to get you. And this is huge, because it means that God was moving the chess pieces before you can even understand it. And it would be beautiful if it was reactive, but it wasn't reactive, it was proactive. Now, just to put a little skin on that for a second, I want you to think about this. Let's just go with husbands as it relates to wives on like Valentine's Day. You know, it's great if he brings you flowers. That's great. But you know what's really cool is when your husband takes like weeks and plans and prepares and dreams and schemes and organizes and moves a bunch of things around so that you can have a really cool day and that you can really feel loved and served, versus on the way home from work, they swing by Kroger and grab some flowers. I mean, that's cool. And for the record, I've done that. But there is something beautiful about knowing that someone who loves you planned and prepared to chase you and pursue you. And Easter says you couldn't overcome sin, but God has, and it wasn't a reaction. It was something he was dreaming about, and he came and he chased you down. It was predicted. And then he pulled it off. Second word that I want you to think about the work of Jesus is that it was painful. It was painful. And I'm not trying to be gross. I'm not trying to be crass. I'm not trying to be like shock person, but I want to let you know that the way Jesus died, crucifixion, was awful. The Romans who killed him were professional murderers. They knew how to do crucifixion unbelievably well, and it was awful. And before Jesus was crucified, he was scourged. He was bent over, tied to something, and they took a cat of nine tails and they whipped him in the back and they ripped the flesh off of his side to where he had bone exposed and he was bleeding out to the inches and inches of almost dying and passing out. Then they asked him to carry a cross and they put a crown of thorns on his head. And they pulled out his beard and they punched him and then they hung him on a cross and they jammed the nails into his legs, into his arms, and he hung there getting in a rhythm, choking on his own bodily fluids, trying to be able to survive. And he did it. And I want you to hear me very clearly. He did not have his life taken away. He willingly laid it down. He willingly endured all of that. Why? Because he knew you couldn't overcome sin, but he could. And the path to that overcoming was more physically beating than you could ever imagine. And it wasn't just the physical beating, it was the emotional beating of looking out and seeing the people that he had trained, and almost all of them had left and betrayed and abandoned him. And then ultimately, the worst of the worst was in a moment none of us can understand. Jesus, who had felt perfect union between his Father and the Spirit, suddenly for the only time in history feels his Father turn his back and he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? It was painful. And you couldn't overcome it, and I couldn't overcome it, but he did. Here's the third word that I want you to think about, is the word it was perfect. And this is just kind of weird to like explain and to get after, but like, again, if sin is real, then there's only two places that we can ultimately deal with what God should have done in his justice. The first place is that we could have a punishment that's eternal and a punishment that's real and a punishment that is forever. Or we could have a payment that is real and is eternal and is perfect. And what Jesus does when he dies on the cross is that he goes to a cross in our place and replaces us. Listen to me. The cross wasn't done just by us and it wasn't done for us, but the cross of Christ was done instead of us. It's where I should have been. I know me. I know what I deserved. But what happened on the cross was that Jesus went there and died in my place. So now that when I have received that work, when God the Father looks at my record of wrongdoing or right doing, he doesn't see me, he sees his Son. It was the perfect exchange. Listen, your morality may keep you in good graces with your friends and your boss and your spouse. Your morality may keep you out of jail, but it is only the blood of Jesus that'll keep you out of hell. You need a perfect sacrifice. So do I. And it's crazy to think about, and it's weighty, and it's difficult. But I want to tell you this Easter, you're not a mistaker who needs a life coach. You're a sinner who needs a Savior. And at the cross, Jesus died for you and overcame sin. And you couldn't, but he did. And it was predicted, and it was painful, and it was perfect. And then the last thing is, it's supposed to be personal. It's supposed to be something that translates into your own heart. The crucifixion was proof that God loves you and he wants to save you. The resurrection was proof that he could. He proved that he could by raising from the dead. And then what Easter is, listen to me, Easter isn't just a proclamation of God, and it's not just a celebration of God. Easter is an invitation for you to know God. It's an invitation for you to take the theories and the thoughts and the ideas of religion and say, no, I want a relationship with the real God. It's meant to be personal. And you have to process, do you really know Jesus that way personally? Has this idea that you couldn't overcome sin, but Jesus did, has it become real to you? Not out there, but in here. And listen, you don't need information, you need revelation. The revelation that this really happened and is real. You know, guys, when we do something like this on Easter, and I think about our Easter services, and I think about talking and music and videos and all that, my single hope in all of it is really one thing. It's that you see Jesus as the overcomer that you need. Let me just make something like kind of like painfully clear. You know, if you leave an Easter service at Grace Fellowship this year and you go home and you go, oh, it's good music and I love that video and I like the way they did that and the guy who talked wasn't too terrible, and you remember all that stuff, we've failed. Because I don't care if you remember a thing that I said, I want you to see Jesus. I don't care if you remember a song that we sang or you liked it or you didn't like. I want you to see Jesus. I want you to see him as the one that overcame the thing that you can overcome. And some of you are like, Keith, that's great for somebody else. I'm sure there are people in this church that they have seen Jesus and they look good and things are cleaned up and things may be great. And Jesus may be great for them, but man, you don't know me and you don't know what I've done. And he may be great for those other people in your church, but I could never be one of those people. Listen to me. The only reason you're even comfortable being in the room with the people, whatever campus you're at this Easter, that you're good sitting near them and being here and believing that, is because you don't know about them the things that I know about them. Because I know us. You know who goes to Grace? Failed parents. People who have gone through bankruptcy, addicts, people who have been in and out of rehab, people that are on their marriage that's a lot more than they should have been, people that have blown up their businesses, people that have smoked and snorted and sniffed things they're not supposed to smoke, snort, and sniff. People that have been self-righteous and people that have been full of bigotry and hate and pride. The only people that you are sitting around this Easter are people who have not cleaned their life up, but people that have been changed by Jesus. And he offers that to anybody, not because you could do it or I could do it, but because he already has. And so the question is, what do you do with that? Like, what do you do with this truth that you couldn't overcome this condition called sin? You've met your match, but Jesus ultimately has. You know, this is the part of the talk where normally what I would do is I would say, who wants to receive Jesus? Let's pray. And then we'll move on. But I want to do it a little bit different. I want us to process a little bit different. So what I want you to do, kind of all play. Come on, let's all skate. Everybody grab their program and a pen or grab their phone. And I just want you to be honest and have like a real moment of reflection about where you are as it relates to this idea that Jesus Christ is the Son of God who came to die and rose again on your behalf, all right? So you're just gonna write down one of four letters, A, B, C, D, all right? Here's A. A is, I have a real relationship with Jesus. This is, you would call yourself a Christian. You would say, I'm in, I believe this, everything you're saying, I'm hip to, I submit to it, I'm in, I trust Jesus. That's A. Man, and if that's you, I'm so glad you're a part of Easter. I hope it's encouraged you, and I hope that you're reminded that you don't just need Jesus for your death, you need Jesus for your every single day. All right, group number 2, B, you're like, I want to start a relationship with Jesus. And you don't even know why you're writing that down or typing that. You're like, I just showed up to Easter, but I kind of feel like I'm supposed to do that, and I think I'm in, and I want Jesus to be my overcomer, and you just put down B. You're like, I want to start that. That's awesome, that's great. All right, how about C? C is, I'm considering a relationship, but I need more time. I'm not a no, but I'm a not yet. Now, what I would say to you is 2 things. Number 1, and I love you, so I'm just gonna tell you this, okay? Be really careful because you don't know when your last day is. I'm not threatening you, I'm just saying that's true. You just don't know that. And so be really careful that you don't wait. And if you're really a B, but you just don't know that you want to say that to the people that came with you, just say, I'm not really a C, I'm a B. But if you're a C, you're a C. And then the second thing I would say to C's is, listen, one of the ways you can keep finding out about this is come back to church. So come back next week. Just come back. We dare you to come back and be a part of what's going on, all right? And then the last group is D. And this is the people that would say, I can't see myself having a real relationship with Jesus ever. Now, if that's you, please hear this. I am so glad you came to be a part of Easter with us. Like seriously, like that's incredible that you don't believe any of this, aren't into any of this, and you're like, I still would come. That's awesome. And I just want you to know that you are welcomed and you are loved, and we still want to be here with you to serve you however you can. All right, so take a look at that and just look, where am I really? And what I want to do in this moment is I want to pray specifically for the B's. And say, okay, you want to start a relationship? Let's do it. So let me ask across the whole church, you just bow your head with me again right now. God, in this moment, I pray for all of us. I pray that for all of us, the resurrection would really move in our soul to change us and transform us and to grow us and to stretch us. And God, I pray for those people that are at a place where they wrote down or typed B and they said, I want a relationship with you. I pray that they would understand that there's no magic to that. It's just from their heart to your being that they say, God, I turn from who I am and I want to follow you and I want to make you my God. I want you to be my king. And I pray that once they do that, they would tell other people. For all of us, God, that we would be encouraged and excited this Easter season about who you are and what you've done. And we would recognize we could never have overcome sin, but you have done it for us. We celebrate that and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.